Hello everyone, welcome to our bonus episode, where we will be going into some unexplained stories. As always, viewers' discretion is advised. Now let's get into the video. I was house sitting for a relative, as she was on holiday. It is a nice house, but not somewhere you should live alone. She was gone for a few days, so I stayed at every other day just because I loved the peace and quiet. I packed my bags and headed over for my night retreat. A chill wind whipped through the deserted streets as I approached my aunt's house. As I stepped inside, a strange sensation prickled my skin. The silence was deafening, broken only by the soft creaking of floorboards. The house was plunged into darkness, forcing me to fumble for the light switch. Once illuminated, I dropped my bags on the sofa and set up my laptop. A cup of tea warmed my hands as I settled in to watch an episode of Mad Men. I was engrossed in the episode when a sudden commotion jolted me from my reverie. Laughter and voices echoed from the garden, growing louder with each passing moment. My heart pounded as I realized they were approaching the house. Their words were indistinct, but I couldn't shake the feeling that they were up to no good. Were they simply trying to scare me, or was something more sinister afoot? Growing up in a tough neighborhood, I'd learned to trust my instincts. Without hesitation, I headed to the kitchen, a gleaming knife in hand. I surveyed the house, flicking on every light switch. A back door led to the garden, and I cautiously swung it open. The garden was empty, and the voices had vanished. Relieved, but still on edge, I returned to the living room to continue watching Mad Men. The house phone rang, but I ignored it, haunted by the memory of a recent horror film. My frustration mounted as the phone continued to ring. Finally, I answered, but only silence greeted me. I hung up, dismissing it as a prank. However, the eerie calls persisted. On the next attempt, I could hear faint breathing, sending shivers down my spine. Determined to put an end to the harassment, I vowed to ignore any future calls. Exhausted and unnerved, I turned off the lights and ascended the stairs. A sense of being watched lingered, intensifying as I entered the room I was sleeping in. A noise outside startled me, but I couldn't discern its source. Curiosity compelled me to peek out the window. To my astonishment, I saw a man in a taxi parked across the street, his gaze fixed intently on me. He seemed oblivious to my presence, as if he had been watching the house for hours. Fear didn't consume me, but a lingering unease made sleep elusive. I couldn't fathom the man's intentions. Hours later, the sound of a running engine jolted me awake. Peering out the window, I saw the same man in the taxi, his gaze still fixed on the house. Despite my growing unease, I eventually drifted off to sleep. Over the next few days, the phone continued to ring, but I refused to answer. The unsettling incident seemed to have concluded. Years later, I still don't know who was calling the phone and what the man in the taxi was planning, but I try my best to forget this happened. The late-night gaming session had left me exhausted, but sleep seemed impossible. As I lay in bed, a strange sensation washed over me. My legs felt as though they were being tugged, as if an invisible force was trying to pull me from the bed. A shiver ran down my spine as a gentle tickle brushed against my feet. I glanced around, but the room was empty. The stillness of the night was shattered by a piercing scream. I leapt out of bed, heart pounding. The moonlit window revealed an empty street, yet, as my eyes adjusted to the darkness, a chilling sight met me. A shadowy figure stood by the door, its eyes fixed on me. The flickering LED lights behind my brother's TV added to the eerie atmosphere. Despite the terror, I managed to fall back asleep. A miracle. The following day, I recounted the night's events to my brother. To my surprise, he had also heard the scream and been unable to sleep. We shared other unsettling experiences, like the time a voice that sounded eerily like his had berated me on the phone, urging me to hurry up. As we exchanged stories, we realized that these unexplained occurrences had been happening to both of us. There was also the time I had been speaking to my brother in the kitchen, only to realize he had been gone for a while. It was a baffling experience, and I couldn't help but wonder if there was more to these events than met the eye. The night was still when I heard a distinct slam of the back door, followed by a soft click as it closed. The wind was calm, so I couldn't explain the sudden disturbance. Dismissing it as a trick of the mind, I drifted back to sleep. The next morning, I was jolted awake, paralyzed, and confronted by a grotesque figure that seemed to materialize out of thin air. Fear didn't consume me, but the sight was unsettling. A nightmare made tangible. A cold hand touched my ear, and a whispered voice, filled with anger, commanded me to keep quiet. I obeyed, my voice frozen in fear. The figure vanished, and I lay there, trembling, convinced that my brother was the culprit. Yet, he was fast asleep. My brother confirmed that he had also heard a whisper, although it had occurred earlier in the morning. Unlike me, he couldn't decipher the words. As a fan of horror, I was intrigued by these unsettling events. I delved into research, hoping to find an explanation. However, my efforts were fruitless. The strange occurrences remained a mystery, defying any rational explanation. A few nights later, I ventured to the bathroom in the dead of night, an act that always seemed unwise. As I passed through the kitchen, I heard a distinct sound coming from the garden, the rhythmic scrape of a shovel. I had heard similar noises before, but this one seemed more prolonged. Dismissing it as a neighbor's late-night project, I returned to bed. Later, I was startled by the sound of footsteps ascending the stairs. I cautiously emerged from my room, but the hallway was empty. The footsteps continued, growing fainter as they retreated. Relief washed over me. Although I couldn't shake the urge to grab the baseball bat I kept in the wardrobe. While I wouldn't hesitate to defend myself, I had no desire to spend a night in jail. Unless, of course, the jail was haunted. In that case, I might be willing to risk it. A weekend outing with my dad took a turn for the eerie. We were returning from visiting a friend when we became hopelessly lost near a dense forest. As darkness descended, the wind whipped through the trees, creating an unsettling atmosphere straight out of a horror movie. Dad ventured outside to get our bearings, disappearing into the pitch-black night. His voice carried back to me, distorted by the howling wind, as he tried to make sense of our surroundings. Suddenly, a figure materialized out of the darkness. A woman in a flowing white dress stood before us, her eyes piercing into my soul. A blood-curdling scream echoed through the night as she approached the car. I frantically tried to signal to my dad, but the darkness obscured my movements. She reached out, her hand brushing against the car, and I caught a fleeting glimpse of her face. It was a sight I would never forget, a grotesque visage that sent chills down my spine. Then, as quickly as she had appeared, she vanished into the inky blackness. My dad returned to the car, and I recounted the terrifying encounter. To my dismay, he dismissed my story as the product of a frightened imagination. Frustrated, he tried to start the car, but the engine refused to cooperate. We were stranded, forced to call a roadside assistance team. As we waited, I glanced in the rearview mirror and froze. There, in the middle of the road, stood the woman in the white dress, her eyes fixed on me once more. The memory of that night still sends shivers down my spine, and I have no desire to return to that forest. I've heard similar tales from friends in America, but I never imagined such horrors could occur in the UK. A few years ago, a chilling incident occurred in my own home. In the dead of night, I was awakened by a blood-curdling scream, followed by a whispered call of my name. Leaping out of bed, I searched the house, but found no one. As I peered out the window, the whisper persisted, echoing through the night. Sleep was impossible that night, and I couldn't help but wonder if it was connected to the woman I had seen years before. That's a wrap, folks. We hope you enjoyed today's chilling tales. 2 of these stories are based on our own experiences, but we'll leave it up to you to figure out which ones. As always, we're on the hunt for your spine-tingling stories. Send us your scariest encounters, and we'll share them with the world. Just remember, keep it real, or you might find yourself haunted by more than just a spooky tale. Until next time, stay safe